Hey guys, today I wanted to talk with you about Hugh Glass. He's probably best known nowadays from the movie The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio, which kind of tells an embellished story of his one that has a lot of Hollywood liberties taken. And so I just wanted to talk about mostly the bear attack and the kind of the survival story of his whole story, but also kind of give you a background on his whole deal. So anyway, he was born in 1783, and in 1816, which would be 33, we know that he became a sailor for a couple of years. Couldn't really find anything about what he did before that. Some stories say that he was apprenticed to a blacksmith slash gunmaker, but it's kind of hard to find any verification on that. So it's hard to be sure. So a couple of years later, after he was already sailing for a couple of years, his ship was attacked by pirate Jean Lafitte, who was pretty well known down in the southeastern part of the U.S. at the time, and he ended up being a pirate for another couple of years, or somewhere in there. Turned out he didn't really like it a lot. There's some places that claim he has a quote saying that they were just the most vile types of humans, and he really hated pirating just for that reason. Some pretty brutal murders sounds like he had witnessed that made him really not want to be a pirate. So him and another guy ended up running away, swam to shore, and they headed north, lived off the land for a while, ran into some Indians, and who ended up killing his buddy, and burning him alive, I believe, is what they did to him. They kind of actually adopted Hugh, which is very interesting. I don't know why they would have killed his buddy, but adopted him into their tribe there. There's one account I read that claimed that he had some spices from his time as a sailor and a pirate that he gave to the tribe chief. I don't know how true that is. That was just one story, probably a little bit of embellishment there. But anyway, we ended up moving on from there. And in 1822, he was looking for work. He joined General William H. Ashley, who was a businessman and aspiring politician type of character, William Ashley's fur company. So beaver pelts were kind of the new craze at the time, especially for hats. It sounded like this was back in the fancy hat era when every man had a fancy hat, and beaver fur was kind of the premium modern material to make felt hats out of. And I believe beaver fur is still one of the preferred furs to make felt hats out of even today. I think Stetson still makes a lot of their hats out of beaver fur. So beaver pelts were going for $2 a pelt at the time, and which in today's money is equivalent to like $48 about, right? So pretty decent from the best information I could get. William Ashley was clearing like $50,000 to $60,000 the first 4 years of this endeavor here, this fur company. Now, I couldn't find whether that was the per year number, if it was 50 to 60 grand per year or for all 4 years. But the equivalence in today's money is about $1.5 to $1.8 million. So it's definitely a substantial amount of money. So it was good business at the time. So anyway, they went out on this expedition. I believe the second expedition for the Ashley Fur Company. I don't believe it was too long into the expedition. They got attacked by the Arikara tribe, which is kind of a reoccurring theme in Hugh Glass's life. The Arikara definitely seemed to have it out for him, but they kind of just did. They had a kind of a bad relationship with trappers going through the area just in general. So kind of sounds like they were kind of at odds with a lot of the hunters and trappers just across the board. In this fight, they lost 14 men out of their group. And the group was known as Ashley's 100. I'm not sure if that actually meant there was 100 men. A lot of accounts seem to think that there wasn't actually 100 men, and that was kind of just a cool name they gave it. But anyway, 14 men were killed and 11 of the men were wounded, including Glass. He got hit in the leg, probably by an arrow. Some accounts say with a musket ball, but kind of sounds like it was probably more likely an arrow. And so he was shot in the leg then, and I bring that up just as kind of just to kind of keep in mind here as we go into this bear attack. So this was about 2 months prior to the bear attack that happened, this famous bear attack. When the bear attack happened, Hugh Glass was out hunting for the group there for the expedition, just hunting for food. And he came across a mother bear and 2 cubs. So a lot of the stories always talk about how huge of a bear it was, which there was a good chance it was a pretty big bear because it was a grizzly bear, but it was an interior grizzly bear, which are usually not the biggest, and it was a female, which are usually substantially smaller than a male. So, you hear stories talk about like 700-pound bear. Probably wasn't that big, would be my guess. That's probably a little bit of embellishment. Was probably substantially smaller than that, like 400 or 500 pounds maybe at the most would be my guess. Even though it was a grizzly bear, still probably wasn't the biggest one. So now that being said, 400-pound bear still gonna screw you up, especially, more than twice your weight, and the strength that a bear has compared to what a human strength is just per pound of body weight is completely, non-comparable. So the other thing I wanted to bring up is the mother and her cubs. That is absolutely the worst possible situation for a bear encounter or any type of animal encounter for the most part. Females just tend to be extremely protective of cubs, and really that seems to be kind of the most aggressive attack. So just about 6 months ago, I think, something about 6 months ago or so, in my hometown, there was an incident where a couple people, I believe they were tourists to the area, were photographing a moose and her calf, and the moose charged them, trampled them, killed one of the guys. The other guy got beat up pretty good, but lived. And that's honestly the most common type of attack in Alaska as far as big game and stuff is mother moose. So even though they're not a predator, and moose usually, are a little on the shyer side, not for most animals, but, they're not going to go hang out around you for the most part. When you get around a mother and her offspring, they can be pretty aggressive, as that story kind of shows. And there's more mother moose attacking people in Alaska than anything else. And it's mostly just because people don't respect the fact that mother moose and any mother animal is going to be very protective, and they don't know what you're up to. And so they're going to be pretty sketched out if you're getting too close and all that kind of thing. So the fact that he ran into a mother bear and 2 cubs is probably why this attack was so bad. Usually what a mother is trying to do is neutralize the threat, right? So either that threat runs away, which you're not doing as a human. You're not outrunning a bear in any capacity. Even if you were Usain Bolt, you wouldn't have the time. Bears aren't the best necessarily long distance runners, but in a short sprint, you couldn't outrun them. The statistics, bears will go 30, 35 miles an hour in a short sprint, which is just absurd speed. And over any type of terrain. If you've ever watched videos, and I've seen this in person, bears on mountains, they move up and down mountains like it's nothing. The difference in muscle strength, like I said, is pretty substantial. So the chance that the threat's going to run away if the threat is a human is pretty much zero. And so then the other option that she's left with is, so you got to kill this threat. And so that's usually what they're trying to do, is kill it, which is not something that bears usually do for eating. Usually when bears are eating an animal, as long as it stops fighting back, they don't really care if it's dead. As long as they can hold it down, they're not worried about killing it, as long as they can eat it. And so this scenario is definitely a scenario where the mother bear was most likely trying to kill Hugh Glass. And so terrible scenario in that aspect. So as far as the injuries, starting out, it sounds like he was able to shoot at least one shot at the bear. Not sure if he hit the bear or not. My guess is he probably would have hit the bear. I don't know why he wouldn't have. He's used to being, out in the woods. He's used to hunting. I wouldn't be surprised if he had encounters with bears before, just because of his lifestyle for the last handful of years. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he did hit the bear. Not surprising that one shot didn't take down the bear, though, especially the guns they had back then. This is the 1800s, early 1800s at that. So they were all using muzzle loaders. So even if it was rifled, not the most accurate, big bullets, a lot of like 45 caliber, 50 caliber rounds, but moving relatively slow, black powder does kind of have a maximum speed it'll allow. So you're not going to get the speeds that you get out of any modern bullets. You can get impressive damage mostly by making the round big and heavy, and that's kind of the strategy they always had. With harder hitting gun, you just use more lead and try to move it as quick as you can. So then while he's getting attacked, the other guys from the expedition come showing up, and they end up shooting the bear, killing her, and he's pretty torn up. He's pretty beat up. So it sounds like it's very common in these stories that he got a broken leg. It sounded like that was pretty well accepted, more so than not. And I'm not sure if it was the leg that he was shot in previously or the other leg, because if you remember, about 2 months earlier, he had been shot in the leg in an Indian attack. And so I'm not sure if it was the same leg that ended up getting broke or if it was the other leg. Not that it really makes a big difference. 2 months of healing, yeah, you're probably still going to feel being shot in the leg. But compared to the other injuries he got in this attack, you're probably not going to really think about that. So one of his legs was broke, which is not surprising. Bears tend to thrash around a lot when they're attacking and killing something. They tend to grab it with their mouth and thrash their head around, if you've ever seen videos of bears killing things. And the other thing they'll do is bounce their body weight onto an animal or an animal that they're killing. So with their front legs, they'll bounce their body onto it, not to mention just also swiping their paws, can have considerable amount of force. So, not sure if his leg was broken from being bit or hit or what exactly, or just crushed. The other thing that seems to be really common in the stories is his scalp was torn open. There's a variation from just being torn open. Some say that it was, like basically barely hanging onto its head. Punctured neck seemed to be really common in the stories too, is that he had a punctured throat that he was breathing through, and also that he had deep lacerations just all over his body, face, body, legs, from teeth and claws, and some so deep on his back that his ribs were showing on his back from how deep of lacerations there was on his back. And to be honest, there's probably a pretty good chance his ribs, he had a lot of broken ribs too. Bears usually tend to use their front legs, their front paws to hold something down while they're attacking it, and they'll put their body weight on it. And like I said, you'll even see videos of them bouncing their body weight onto something, intentionally trying to break stuff. And also when they're tearing away, they push with their paws. That's usually when they're eating, but regardless, you're probably going to end up with some broken legs. And she obviously wasn't trying to eat him. This was just her trying to protect her cubs. So there's a good chance he probably had quite a few broken ribs, I would imagine. And so the rest of the party, they basically thought he was done for. And so they were like, well, he's going to be dead in the morning. So they stayed with him until the morning, the whole expedition. And I'm not sure if they brought him back to their camp is probably what they did. I'm sure they cleaned him up some, but they probably weren't wasting too much medical supplies when this dude was definitely going to die. And so in the morning, they found out he was still alive, and they were like, well, we got to keep moving. They were in hostile territory. I believe it was the Arikarath still. And so they need to keep moving. There was another group of guys they were supposed to meet up with at a certain point. So being on time for them, plus just spending less time in the territory was going to be safer. So they fashioned up a little gurney to carry him on, and threw him on the gurney. In 2 days, they carried him for, which was slow going. It was slowing down the group. And at the end of the 2 days, they were like, look, he's not getting any better. It didn't sound like he was hardly doing anything except for breathing. And so after some time, they decided, well, we can't be moving this slow with this guy. And we have to we got to make better time. And so Henry decides that he's going to have 2 guys stay behind with Hugh to give him a Christian burial when he dies. So they're just supposed to stay back with him till he dies, bury him, and then come and catch up to the rest of the group. And he asked for volunteers, apparently. And $80 is what he offered the volunteers if they stayed with him, which is about $2,000 today. I think it came out to like $2,150 when I recorded this. Pretty good money. I'm not sure if that was $80 for both guys, or if that was $80 per person. But that's what he offered them to stay. And so they took off, the 2 men. There was the older man and the younger man. Fitzgerald was the older man. The younger guy kind of ranges from like late teens, early 20s age-wise. Some stories think it was Jim Bridger as a young man who became a pretty famous mountain man after this. And seems plausible, but it is kind of hard to tell which stories are embellishing and which ones are not. So these guys stayed with him for 5 days. And he still didn't die. And they were really getting concerned about the Indians, concerned about not catching up with the rest of the guys. And Hugh was not getting any better. So they ended up leaving him, and they took his rifle and his knife. Some stories say they also took his flint, which basically leaves you screwed. They took off, just left him there. And so he rode there for a while, and time frames are kind of hard to determine, but he eventually, some of the stories say he set his broken leg, scrounged around, got some berries, made his way to a stream, got some water. And the leg thing, even if you set a broken leg, trying to walk on it right away is definitely difficult. So a lot of the stories suggest that he was crawling on the ground for quite a while. So this is in South Dakota. He's trying to make it, eventually he'll make it back to Fort Kiowa, if that's how you pronounce it. I'm not sure. Kiowa. And eventually he'll make it back there, which is 200 to 300 miles is the estimate from where he was left. So that is substantial hike under the best of conditions. It was in South Dakota at the time, and this was August heading into, I believe it was the very end of August was when they believe he was attacked. So kind of heading into October and everything. So was crawling on the ground for the first part of it, which, first of all, laying on the ground and trying to navigate seems almost impossible. The idea of crawling across the ground for days on end. It's one thing if you're crawling across the field, stalking an animal to hunt or something of that nature. You know where you're going and you have a picture in your mind of what the field looks like. But the idea of crawling across the ground for days in any general direction seems insane to me. Like, yes, you would have the sun, so you'd be able to tell where the sun was rising and setting. You'd have the stars. Guys back then were probably pretty good navigating by the stars. And you probably did a lot of resting. You know, it was probably the first few days were probably a lot of crawling around, trying to get some type of food. One story I read said he did kill a rattlesnake pretty early on and ate it. If he didn't have a flint, that means he definitely ate it raw, because he's not starting fire without a flint. And in the shape he was in, there's a good chance he's not starting fire even if he had a flint, because the amount of effort it would take to get kindling, tinder, wood, all that stuff, get it all together, get a spark in there to get it ignited would just be too much work. Not to mention he had a broken leg, so there's probably a good chance that was trying to stay pretty still, you know, and not move around too much, just allowing his leg to set up a little better. Which, speaking of that, actually, so if you look it up today, for a broken leg, and they wouldn't talk about which part of his leg was broken. It could have been at the knee, which probably not. I'm guessing it broke somewhere else, just right through solid bone, because otherwise, if it was your knee joint, it would probably wouldn't heal up, would be my guess, and you're probably not going to be walking on it ever again. Also 3 to 6 months to fully heal. Now, the entire journey that Hugh took from where he was left to getting to Fort Kiowa was about 6 weeks, it sounds like. 5 to 6 weeks is the amount of time it took him for 200 to 300 miles, which is plenty of time, you know, if you're a healthy person. But obviously he wasn't. So, under the best conditions, 3 to 6 months. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that it's good enough to use. They're talking about like a full heals recovery, full weight on it type of thing. Whereas most of the time you could probably put full weight on it for, they're like, okay, you can go ahead and use it like a leg. They want to stay on the safe side. You know, most medical professionals are going to stay on the safe side of that. But even with that, his leg being okay to walk on by the time he was using it seems impossible to be honest. It's surprising he was able to walk at any point in this journey if he had a broken leg, even if he was making a makeshift crutch or something, just with how screwed up everything was. So average temperatures at the time, I think for that area, the average highs were kind of in the, I know, mid 60s, and the average lows were kind of in the low 40s. So not terribly brutal temperatures, but when you're screwed up this bad, that's a little on the cool side for sure, especially at night. So on his way, apparently he had seen a dead bison on his trip. This sounds like it was still while he was crawling on the ground. He found a dead bison that wolves were eating, and there's kind of two versions to the story. I think one's a bit more believable. The cooler one is that he still had his flint, which some stories say that his flint was taken by the two men when they left him. But this story, he still had his flint and his razor, shaving razor, and was able to set fire to the grass upwind of the wolves. The fire scared the wolves away, and he was able to go in and eat some bison. And in this story, he actually cooked the bison, which I also think is probably likely. The more believable story, to me at least, is that he waited until the wolves left the carcass, and then he went over there and scrounged whatever meat he could. Probably ate it raw. Like I said, some accounts made it sound like he didn't even have his flint with him. And even if he did while you're crawling around, the amount of work it would take to get things together to start a fire good enough to cook with, especially anywhere there's a bison, I'm not sure how many trees are around, how far you would have to go, but even having to go 100 yards to get wood when one of your legs is broken and your entire body's torn apart, you have a hole that you're breathing through in your neck, and your ribs are showing in your back, and your scalp's hanging off your head. Even 100 yards to get some firewood is pretty brutal. And like I said, starting fire with just a spark is pretty rough, because you do have to get kindling, and you have to get tinder. You got to have things that are, really easy to light to get that fire going. You have to prepare your fire pretty well so that it's ready to start. And that's just something that's probably not going to happen under those conditions. So I would imagine he's just eating it raw. Not to mention, he's probably starving. He's definitely starving. He's been out, I don't know how long it is after the bear attack that he finds this bison, but barely eating anything, obviously, since he's been attacked, because they most likely weren't feeding him much because he had a hole in his throat. He might have gotten some water, but they were pretty sure he was going to die. So they're not going to waste too much on him. And besides that, he had a hole in his neck, probably couldn't really eat. So he probably wasn't eating when he was still being watched. And now that he's healed up enough to eat, supposedly he's, doesn't have supplies around. So he's foraging and catching. So anyway, he continues on to Fort Kiowa. Some accounts say that he ran into Indians who gave him a horse. Some accounts just say that he just kept walking. Either way is pretty remarkable. It definitely would be more believable that some Indians helped him along, not necessarily for the horse aspect part of it, because like I said, the people in those days, that kind of distance wasn't insane, but the just being able to heal up part of it, I really wouldn't be surprised if he ran into some Indians that just helped him heal up. The amount of healing you could do in 6 weeks, though, he was still pretty determined to keep pushing on, even if he did run into them. It's not like he hung out there till he was all better. He was still in pretty rough shape, obviously. So anyway, he pushes on to Fort Kiowa, stays there, and then heals up, gets some supplies on credit. I believe if he gets a gun and a knife, some other stuff on credit. And then he moves on to Fort Henry, which by the time he got to where Fort Henry used to be, was gone. It had moved like 700 miles, I believe. Some stories say he found a note there that said, hey, Fort Henry moved. This is a new location. Who knows if that's true? I'm not sure why they moved, but anyway, he went up to go find the other location there. And that's where he ended up finding Bridger, or Bridges, depending on what story. This is the person that a lot of stories claim was Jim Bridger when he was young. And so he found Jim Bridger, ended up forgiving him. There's kind of a couple different stories. One of the stories says, basically forgave him because he's a young kid. He was just doing what the old guy wanted him to. And the other story, he said, life and God will. Yeah. figure it out or whatever. In one story, supposedly Jim or Bridger had his knife, which he got back from him, but he still really wanted his gun back. And so he went off in search of Fitzgerald. So he didn't catch up with Fitzgerald until June of 1824, and he had joined up with some other trappers traveling with them by that time. And actually, on his way to find Fitzgerald, he was ambushed by the Rickera again, one of the many times in his life that happened, and they had lost 2 men. The story goes that they ran into the Rickera on the river. They thought they were a different tribe. The Rickera acted friendly, invited them to eat some food. They went into the tent to have some dinner, and Hugh recognized a few words. He knew a few words of Rickera language, and he recognized some of them and realized that they were a Rickera. And so one story says that he stood up and smiling started telling the other trappers about the problem they were in. And they had all left their guns at their boat, except for one man, I believe, had a gun with him. And I believe there was 4 of them in the beginning. So telling the trappers, but smiling and pretending as and acting as if he was complimenting the Indians. And he was telling the trappers that they were in a bad situation and that was a trap and they needed to get out of there. So they all ran for it, being chased by the Indians. The Indians had already got to their boat. And so they went for a swim. 2 of them end up getting killed. Hugh and one of the other guys end up making it across the river and getting away. And carried on like that. So eventually he finds Fitzgerald in 1824 in June. And so it's been a while. And Fitzgerald had joined the military. And so when he confronted Fitzgerald, I'm not sure if he just knew this or if it was reminded to him by the military guys around at the time. The fort they were in, some accounts say that one of Fitzgerald's superiors had to kind of step in and mention to Hugh that Fitzgerald was the soldier now, and so, obviously killing a soldier would be punished by hanging. And so he didn't end up killing him, but he did end up getting his gun back, and moving on with his life. But anyway, that's just one of those stories that I've always found fascinating, and I've always been impressed, even if you get rid of all the embellishments, just the facts of how brutal the attack was, how beat up he was. They were all convinced he was going to die, so they ended up leaving him there. And then him making it back, that 6-week journey he took to Fort Kiowa, just is an incredible testament to perseverance a human can have when they really set their mind to something. So that's just a story I've always found fascinating, and I hope you guys enjoy it, and hope you enjoy my kind of commentary on everything. So thank you.